Just don't say it's love. You know it ain't sweet enough.
Good morning. So, if you thought that the Petito and Laundrie saga was over, it is not. The Petito family has sued the Laundrie family in a Sarasota court. Now, before we get into it and why I think that the Petitos cannot win this lawsuit, please let me just give this little disclaimer. Everything said on this channel is my opinion and my opinion only. And when I look at a case, I like to look at it in its entirety. What was everybody involved thinking and feeling and what led to their actions in a certain situation. It is not about me defending one party or dismissing another. And I do have lots of empathy and sympathy for the victim's family. But I think that human nature is never cut and dry. It is never black and white. And we need to look at the entire situation to see how and why people acted in the way that they did. This is something I try to do in all of my cases. And so it shouldn't be looked at and picked apart as me having, favoritism for either the victim or the perpetrator in this case or any other case on my channel. With that said, so the Petito family is alleging that the Laundrie family was well aware that Brian had killed Gabby and that they may have even known the exact location of her remains, and that they shut out the Petito family and refused to talk to them, and that they helped Brian elude law enforcement. So that's just kind of the general gist of this $100,000 lawsuit. Now, it is a civil case. It is not a criminal case. Please keep in mind that the FBI and the police never charged the Laundrie family with any criminal responsibility in this case. So when we look at the situation, here's what we do know. We know that Brian did kill Gabby in the Wyoming National Park and that is where her remains were found. He left there and he was back in Florida on or around August 30th or September 1st. By September 2nd, the Laundrie family had already hired an attorney. So I want to point this out, okay? They had every legal right to hire an attorney. Whether they suspected that Brian killed Gabby or whether Brian told them he killed Gabby, they have a right as an American to hire an attorney. So please, keep that in mind. Also, they had no legal obligation to talk to the Petitos once they had an attorney. If you hire an attorney, it is typically for that attorney to do your speaking for you. Now that is completely different from their moral obligation. We could talk all day long about whether or not they had a moral obligation to talk to the Petito family. After all, they had a civil relationship with them. They supposedly loved Gabby. Gabby was their son's fiance, and this family that they knew and had a somewhat of a relationship with was clearly grieving and, trying to find out whether their daughter in the early phases was even dead or alive. They didn't know where her remains were, if in fact she was deceased. And if the Laundrie family had this information, well, yes, you could argue that they had a very moral obligation to talk to the Petito family. But we're not talking about morality here. We're talking about legality and whether or not the Petitos can win this lawsuit. The fact of the matter is, the Laundrie family had no obligation to talk to the Petitos or any other third party. They had already retained an attorney. And per advice of their attorney, they didn't speak publicly. And that was their right. Whether you think it's right is another matter. But they had a legal right, okay? And as far as them getting the information from Brian, if in fact he said to them, I killed Gabby, well, let me just say this. Florida itself does not have a child-parent privilege law, okay? And only 5 states do. Every state in the United States has a spousal law that protects spouses from having to testify against each other. But only 5 states have that same law for parent-child. And a lot of people argue that, yes, there is a sanctity of marriage that should not be broken by the government, but that same sanctity needs to exist for parent-child relationships. That if your child tells you something, it should be expected that it would be in confidence. So with that said, Florida does not have that type of protection for child-parent. But guess what? In 2003, 2004, the federal government amended an act that would now include the parent-child relationship. And just like the spousal relationship, it is protected that a parent does not have to testify against their child and vice versa. Well, when there's a conflict between a state law and a federal law, the federal law wins. So regardless if Florida doesn't recognize this, the federal law does. So if you have an attorney, he's going to waltz into that courtroom and he's going to say there in Florida, hey, you don't have this spousal protection, this parent protection, but guess what? The federal law does, and that supersedes your law here in Florida. And there's no way around that. Federal law supersedes state law. So even in a court of law, the Laundries have federal protection. They would not have had to divulge what Brian said to them. Again, morality, maybe. Legality, they're in the right. So now let's look at whether or not they helped elude the authorities. The Petitos are alleging that the Laundries were going to help him flee the country. I don't know if that was a thought they threw around, but we do know that he didn't flee the country, so I don't think that's nor here nor there. He, in fact, went out to the Carlton Reserve in Northport, Florida. Well, if you think back to this case in the early stages, the Laundries told law enforcement that he went for a hike in the Carlton Reserve. Now, there was allegedly a 4-day period from the time he went on this hike till they reported him as a missing person. 13, 14, 15, yeah, I think it was like the 13th to the 17th, if I'm not mistaken. Nonetheless, that's where they told him, or them, that they could find him. He went for a hike and he didn't come back. So at this point, I guess they checked the reserve, but then this weird manhunt started where they were like taking tips from all over. They were chasing his tail to California. They were literally all over the United States. At the end of the day, when all was said and done in November, where did they find his remains? In the Carlton Reserve. So, I mean, there's no way around that. That's the first place that the Laundries ever told the police that he went for a hike in the Carlton Reserve and he didn't come back. Now, they found him in the Carlton Reserve and he didn't come back because he was found deceased. And it's believed that he committed suicide pretty much right off the bat when he got out to the reserve. My personal opinion, they used that 4 days to give him time to commit suicide. I don't know, it sounds awful, but I think that they knew that's why he went out there and they gave him that time frame to do it. And then they reported him missing. But good luck in a court of law saying that they eluded police, because if you have a halfway decent attorney, he's going to be like, I don't know like what the issue is, because they reported him missing. They said he went to the Carlton Reserve and he was found in the Carlton Reserve. So, end of story. So, although the Petitos undoubtedly suffered, just as their lawsuit alleges that, they suffered unnecessary stress and trauma and lack of enjoyment in their life. These are things that are put in their lawsuit due to being shut out by the Laundries and the Laundries withholding the information that they had. The fact of the matter is, there's not a lot of legal basis for them to win this, in my opinion. And again, We can talk all day long. What should the Laundries have done? What would have been the moral and the correct thing for them to have done? But from a legal basis, once they had that attorney, they didn't have to speak. Whether they blocked you on Facebook, whether they blocked your phone, whether they refused to talk to you, whether they refused to give press conferences, none of it. They had an attorney, and that attorney admits that, hey, I told them not to speak. That's my job as an attorney, and they're right as my client. And again, eluding police is going to be a hard one to win because they did send the police in the direction of the very place that he ultimately was found. And, again, we have that federal law that even if this had ever, if Brian hadn't died and it ever went to court, they even had a federal law that would have protected them from ever having to get on that stand and ever having to say what Brian told them. So I personally do not think that the Petitos can win this lawsuit. And I think that because Brian and Gabby are both deceased, I think that they truly feel they never got justice for Gabby because Brian was never held legally and criminally responsible. And so this is their next best shot, is a civil suit against the parents. I think that they want some kind of justice. And the only way that they feel they can get it at this point would be a monetary lawsuit in a civil court. And I totally get what they're thinking and what they're feeling. I just don't think that they're going to have the ability to win it based on the circumstances. And, my heart goes out to them. I do not know, and I cannot imagine what they have felt. And especially when the Laundrie shut them out, the only people they felt had the information to send them in the direction of possibly the remains of their deceased child. I mean, it is horrific. I can't imagine what they felt. God willing, I will never know what they felt. But I am speaking from somebody on the outside looking in and what this lawsuit is and can it be won. And I say it cannot be won. Tell me what you think. Not whether or not you think they should win, because that is a whole other situation. Not whether or not you think that the Laundries are shitty people and that they should have done things differently, because that is a different story. Just the lawsuit. Do you think that they can win it? Why or why not? So have a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.